Perhaps my review of it didn't quite drive the point home, but I thought that Batman Arkham City was not only a fantastic game in its own right, but one of the best games that I'd ever played on the Xbox 360. So it shouldn't be much of a surprise to you when I say that Batman Arkham Knight was my most anticipated game of this year. Now, before I begin, I'd like to mention that I was aware of the GameSpot review. In fact, I posted on the YouTube video of the GameSpot review of this game, criticizing it heavily, and having many likes on my comment. As soon as I saw that this game only garnered a 7 out of 10 score from GameSpot, I was immediately dismissive of the review just because I'm very hesitant and skeptical about GameSpot reviews in general nowadays, but also because of the fact that Kevin Van Ord was the reviewer of the game. I'm aware that Kevin Van Ord's preference is generally for RPG titles, and whenever he criticizes games, he usually criticizes the story and mentions the story more so than the gameplay. So with his reviews, he's generally either spot on or just completely misses the mark. And in this case, unfortunately, he gets more right than wrong in his review. In my opinion, this is easily the worst of the Arkham games, including Arkham Origins, which, as you probably know and as I'm fully aware of, the game was criticized much more so and generally not viewed quite as favorably as the first two Arkham games, but I basically thought it was the same level of quality as at least Arkham Asylum. What Origins lacked in novelty and innovation, it more than made up for in its epic boss battles, in my eyes. While this game certainly lacks in that department, to say the least, I think I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here, so let me just explain the basic premise of the story here. So it's been about 9 months since the Joker's death, and as you saw in one of the first clips of this video, his body is cremated, and the first opening scene is his body, his corpse, being burned. And basically, the Scarecrow is the primary villain here, and he's threatened the city with his toxic hallucinogenic gas, and the city evacuated itself, and it's your job as Batman to track him down and hunt him down and stop him. I found the opening of this game to be quite strong and frankly avant-garde, with the opening shot of the Joker's body being burnt, as well as the fact that you technically play as a cop character for about 3 minutes before you play as Batman in a first-person mode as you experience the Scarecrow's hallucinogenic drug. My biggest issue with this game is probably its story, but unfortunately I can't really elaborate on my criticisms of this story too much without going into too much spoiler territory for you. So really the only thing I could say is that the villains were lacking in lackluster compared to the previous games, and the Arkham Knight character, well, he's my biggest problem with the story. Everything about this character that they introduced is poorly done and just mishandled completely, in my opinion. They had potential with this character, and they just completely mishandled him, misused him, and his entire presence throughout the game is completely predictable, mundane, and underwhelming in every sense. I'll elaborate and disclose my criticisms with the story and with the Arkham Knight character at the end of the video in my spoiler section. But for now, let's move on to gameplay. Well, there's obviously the hand-to-hand combat, which is my favorite aspect of the game, and that's mostly remained unchanged. There's nothing really they could have improved upon, to be honest with you. They've kept the same giant character in some of the combat encounters, the ones that take more damage to bring down, back from Arkham Origins, as well as characters who sprint right up to you to try and tackle you down to the ground. And it's very amusing when you jump over them and they land face first on the ground, like complete morons. There's also some enemies that wear electrical armor they have to take down using the Bat Claw maneuver, and I'm sure there's some other combat maneuvers here and there that are more subtle that I'm not remembering off the top of my head. But for the most part, the combat has remained unaltered from the previous games, as it should be. As I said, the combat is basically perfect. The countering system is fast, fluid, and everything about the combat, hand-to-hand stuff, is just absolutely enjoyable and a blast to play through. The Predator sequences, or the stealth sections, or whatever you wish to call them, have also mostly remained unaltered in terms of their fundamental mechanics, and that's also a good thing, but they've also, I think, been improved a bit in this game, just because the environments that these take place in are more open and large, so there's more flexibility in terms of how you want to approach taking down your enemies, and that's always a good thing. There's also this new mechanic called the Fear Takedown, which is going to be demonstrated quite shortly here. As you can see from this clip right here, this Fear multi-takedown allows you to take out multiple enemies in a succession. This new mechanic may be a bit overpowered, certainly, but it's just definitely a new fun addition that they've included here. And just in terms of maneuvering around the city, the grapple gun booster thing or whatever, when you're just moving about, latching onto any environmental object, that's been improved because you can just basically target your next location to grapple onto while you're still being reeled into your location. And so basically that allows you to move around the world faster and more fluidly. Now, what you've all been waiting for here, that you probably haven't discussed yet, are the tank sequences, the Batmobile sequences. So, basically the controls for it are a bit awkward to use. I mean, I think the controls for the tank part, there's two different, I guess, parts to this. The first of which is just generally fighting around with people, the tank part, where you fire missiles and rockets at people and stuff like that. Basically, you have to hold down the left trigger during the default control scheme with it, and you fire with RT, and then you can press A to sort of boost and move out of the way of the line of fire of the other remote control tanks that you're going to be fighting throughout the game. And it works well enough, but I think where the controls falter a little bit is when you're actually just driving around, because basically you have to hold down RT and the brake button is X, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I mean, it kind of feels just awkward coming from Grand Theft Auto or any other type of driving game where it's always LT, RT. Thankfully, you can change this in the options menu, but unfortunately, the option to change this is a little bit difficult to find, and it's not really apparent what it does. So there's that issue with it, but you know, it's fixable. You can obviously change that, and that kind of eradicates it. But as for the sequences themselves, there's nothing really wrong with them. It's just the fact that they happen a little bit too frequently, and the reason why that's a problem is just because the tank combat itself, in and of itself by default, just kind of lacks the same amount of variety, and it just is not as diverse in how you approach it, because you're basically just going to be spamming the same tactics over and over again. And if you just compare that to the hand-to-hand fighting, but especially the stealth encounters here, where you can approach the environment and the enemies in whatever way you want in several different ways, because in the stealth encounters in this game, they could play out several different ways, and with the tank encounters, like I said, you're just going to be spamming the same dodge maneuver and then just keep firing. There's different upgrades to the tank. I mean, if you basically hit tanks or destroy the enemy tanks or whatever without being hit yourself, you build up a bar which allows you to fire off a few missiles in rapid succession to instantly kill more or to destroy more tanks. I mean, it's all okay or whatever, but it's just not, I don't know, it just feels a little bit lackluster compared to the main combat that you've encountered before in the previous games that you're already acclimated to. Look, I understand that the developers really, might have wanted to show off this new Batmobile feature and everything like that, but really I think they should have relegated it to as an optional travel device, even though traveling is still much more efficient by way of gliding around and everything like that. Although it is cool how if you point down on the ground and press the LB button, you can basically summon it instantly wherever you are. For the most part, and it's cool to, the animation's cool in terms of you getting into the Batmobile. And when you're driving at fast speeds, you can press LB to sort of fly out and glide out. And it's all kind of rather seamless, which is good. But I feel as if it should have ultimately been relegated more as just a transportation device and less so during the main missions. If they really wanted to implement it, they should have just included it solely for the side missions or for some of the side missions. And if they really wanted to include it that badly, they should have just made some of the main story missions more, I guess you could say, open-ended in terms of your approach, kind of like how the stealth approaches are, but in terms of you can approach it either stealth-wise, combat-wise, or make the environment more open so that you could choose to use the tank if you wanted to, but not necessarily, forcing tank missions upon it, because the thing is, they constitute probably over a third of the game, probably around 40% of the game or so are tank missions, solely just, blowing other remote control tanks apart, and it just becomes a little bit monotonous. It feels a little bit intrusive or invasive almost to the other aspects of the game, just because you'd rather, or at least I would, while I was playing the game. I just was thinking I'd rather play I'd rather do hand-to-hand stuff, or I'd rather do stealth encounters, because they're just more diverse. They're more interesting. I mean, I understand, like I said before, they wanted to include something new so much, but, it hadn't been perfected. Those mechanics, the fight mechanics, the stealth mechanics, had 3 games to be perfected, whereas this Batmobile is just a new mechanic, and they've implemented it just too often in the game. There's also puzzle elements with the Batmobile, and I should say just in general, I dislike this game more than the others because it included more puzzles, and that's probably one of the reasons why I liked Arkham City quite a bit compared to some of the other ones, and even Arkham Origins, because they lacked certain annoying puzzle elements that, they didn't have nearly as many puzzles as Arkham Asylum, and not nearly as many as in this game, and I felt the puzzles were just a little bit annoying, especially since many of them, or most all of them, are forced to use the Batmobile in some way in order to progress through them. And it just becomes annoying. I think if you get stuck on them, it dampers or puts a halt on the overall pacing of the game. It slows things down. I don't know. It doesn't really quite match with the fast-flowing combat of the game. It just kind of serves to pad out the length of the game a bit. So I didn't really much care for the puzzle elements of this game. And in terms of the boss battles, well, there's no real... Okay, well, there's one boss battle that I liked that's actually really hand-to-hand. You and Robin basically team up, I guess you could say. I shouldn't even really mention this that much, but during 1 or 2 missions, you get to team up with Robin and just fight during one mission. It's basically no different from you playing it normally. It's just you get to switch between characters. But there's a boss battle where you take on some, 7-foot-tall African-American boxer who's been infected with the Joker's blood or whatever. And it's a really cool fight scene. Unfortunately, it lasts less than 5 minutes out of, a 12-hour or so game. And all the other fight sequences or boss battles, rather, are relegated to fighting the Arkham Knight. However, they're all using the Batmobile. Like, for example, one of the final fight, the boss battles or whatever, is basically following around his tank, hitting it once in its weak spot, driving off for a minute or so, waiting to be lost, out of sight of his tank, and driving around again to this back tank and shooting again. It's so repetitive, so redundant. It lacks any diversity in terms of your approach in combat with it. So the boss battles are just, subpar and mediocre, as Kevin Van Ord mentioned in his review. I was expecting something, along the lines of more of a Deathstroke fight between the Arkham Knight, and not, I guess you can't really consider it a story spoiler, but unfortunately that does not happen. It just does not happen at all. So there's really no unique or interesting boss battles in this game whatsoever, whereas I thought that was actually a really good strength of some of the previous Arkham games. Now granted, as I said, there is one good boss battle in the game where you fight the giant guy with Robin. But the game really needed about 2 or 3 more of these types of fights in order to counterbalance the mediocre, redundant, and lackluster tank battles. So unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity and time to delve into the side content and all the side missions that this game has to offer. So maybe once I beat those, my opinion might, be more favorable towards this game. But in terms of what I'd rate this out of a 10, I think the game overall, a lot of my issues with this are subjective, personal issues that I haven't mentioned in terms of the story, and I think the tank sequences are, probably the weaker parts of this game. So overall, I'd guess this is probably an 8.5 out of 10 game, maybe even a 9 out of 10. Easily the weakest of the other games, but my personal score would probably be about a 7. Maybe, okay, 7.5. 7.5, which is still good, but just they didn't really take advantage of the opportunities and the premise of the characters. I felt as if there was a lot of wasted potential and missed potential with this title. But if you're a big Batman fan, I definitely recommend that you check it out. Don't let that's just my personal opinion. I was disappointed with this game, but a lot of other people loved it, and good for them. I mean, mechanically and gameplay wise, everything is basically flawless in terms of the mechanics. I mean, even the tank battles, there's nothing really mechanically wrong with them. They're just redundant. But everything else, of course, the combat and the stealth encounters are basically nailed to perfection. So overall, this is still a very good title to pick up. Now to go into spoiler territory. So if you don't want the game to be spoiled for you, please watch no further. Much of the fault in this game ends up lying in its story, starting right with the Joker. See, I would hardly actually refer to him as being dead in this Arkham series at this point in the game, because they bring him back in Batman's memory, in his mind. So basically, once you progress about 2 hours or so into this game, the Joker just pops up everywhere. He's just basically standing there like an NPC and just rambles on about whatever predicament you're in. His presence in this game is omnipotent and overbearing. His presence here does not give the other villains an opportunity to shine at all. I get that the writers are trying to convey that the Joker is still living on in Batman's memory and that he's still, mentally, internally tormenting him. But just his frequent presence in this game undermines the dramatic death scene at the end of Arkham City. It just serves to undermine that when he's just constantly around anyways. If you have the balls as a writer to kill off Batman's arch nemesis, then kudos to you, but commit to that fact. If you don't wish for him to be the main antagonist of the next installment, then keep him out and let him rest so that other villains will have their opportunity in the spotlight. And if you don't wish for him to be dead, then don't kill him in the last game and just make him the main antagonist, or better yet, don't make the other game at all. All it does is just serve to undermine the story when he's constantly overshadowing the other villains. It just undermines the quality of your story. And frankly, the frequency that he appears in this game, it just comes across as a little bit self-indulgent to me. Not that there's anything inherently wrong with using this technique. I mean, the third season of The Following used this exact method, except it was more successful there because it was used much more sparingly, and for only about a minute or so for each episode, not each minute. Problem number 2 with this story, and my biggest beef with this fucking game. So back several months ago, when this Arkham Knight character was first announced, the Rocksteady writers, or whoever it was, basically said that this was going to be a completely new character made specifically for this game. Well, what a load of horseshit that is. It turns out that the Arkham Knight is no other than Jason Todd, also known as the Red Hood, also known as Robin. I mean, seriously? Everyone's first guess was the Red Hood, and even if you have no idea who this guy is, there's some blatant and obvious foreshadowing about halfway through the game of Jason Todd being tortured by the Joker, just to ruin the already ruined reveal furthermore. I mean, imagine if Marvel retitled Captain America the Winter Soldier Captain America the Dark Spectre, or something along those lines, and blatantly lied to the fans that it was going to be a completely original character, despite the fact that the Winter Soldier is one of the most iconic Captain America villains ever. Sure, the reveal itself in that movie may not have been surprising to most of the fan base, but at least the writers and producers or whatever didn't try to deceive anyone into a false sense of mystery with this character by, completely lying to the fan base and all the fans that it was going to be an original character. When this character was first announced and when they announced that it was going to be completely original, I expected that it was going to be some sort of anti hero, or the antithesis of Batman. I expected the character to challenge philosophically Batman's moral principles surrounding being the protector and the Dark Knight of Gotham. Someone resembling Ra's al Ghul, for example, or Bane from The Dark Knight Rises, or even more like Bane from Batman Arkham Origins. While I can positively say that Rocksteady did a good job of designing the look of this character in terms of being the antithesis of Batman with his militaristic armor and whatnot, and as well as the fact that his voice potentially could sound, badass, I think the voice actor did a good enough job voicing this role. He just never came across as particularly intelligent or having any real depth to his character. He's basically acts like a petulant child throughout who's just like really angry, and that's all. The bottom line here is that simply calling a character a different name doesn't mean the character is different at all. But the thing is, the sad truth is, even with this different moniker throughout the whole game, once the Arkham Knight reveals his identity, he almost instantly turns into the Red Hood because he strips away his outer layer of his mask gets destroyed, and his inner layer is basically turns red, as in resembling the Red Hood, just to pour salt in the wound. Another problem I have with this character is that he lacks any good boss battles to fight him. You have 3 boss battles with him that are all vehicular, and the final boss battle that you have with him when he unveils his identity to you is basically just a normal Predator stealth encounter with basically nothing different between them. I was expecting something more along the lines of the Deathstroke fight from Batman Arkham Origins, and not something like this. I mean, just briefly imagine the potential of like a final epic hand-to-hand encounter with this Arkham Knight character. That would just be monumental, and they just squandered all of that opportunity and potential with him, which just makes it all the more infuriating to me. So you're probably wondering, where does this all leave the Scarecrow? And the Scarecrow, I guess he's supposed to be the main villain of this whole game, but to be honest, he was just kind of drowned out, both by the Joker as well as like the artificial sense of mystery built up surrounding unveiling the Arkham Knight's real identity. I mean, like, Batman, and this is my final problem with the story of this game, really, is just the fact that Batman and Gordon act so out of character to who they are when Batman basically surrenders himself to Scarecrow at the end and unveils his identity to the entire world at the end of the game. To me, it just feels as if both of the characters were just written out of character just to rush an ending. And my final issue is with the fact that the ending of the game that you actually beat them after you beat the main story mode is just you handing off the Scarecrow into the police station and then talking to Alfred and saying you're going to initiate the Nightfall protocol. But then you're just kind of free to move around the city and do whatever you want. But there's also a 5 minute the real ending to the game is a 5 minute or so cutscene, which you don't unlock unless you beat 100% of the game, which entails completing all of the side activities of the game. Are you fucking kidding me? That probably takes longer to beat and to complete fully than to actually beat the entire game. And for a fucking 5 minute cutscene that really should have been like the ending to the overall game? I mean, seriously? Yeah, okay, fine, there's the story continuity because he basically blows up his mansion and whatever, and the Batman is Bruce Wayne is ultimately assumed to be dead by the public eye in the real end of the cutscene. But it just feels so unfair to the player to have to, and frankly, the only way people would know that is if they go on YouTube to type in the secret ending, which I don't know if a lot of players are going to do that. They're probably going to be angry about that. So, anyways, so the Scarecrow, overall just ends up being drowned out as a villain. I'm sure on his own he'd be okay. I mean, the guy's I think he's better in this game as a in terms of the voice actor and in terms of his appearance compared to the previous Arkham Asylum. I don't think he was in Arkham City, but compared to Arkham Asylum, he's much better here. But regardless, it doesn't really matter because he gets drowned out by both the Jokers, in Batman's mind, his presence as well as just the Arkham Knight. Even though the Arkham Knight himself is not really a main villain, I mean he's not really a very good villain, and I don't even know why they decided to if they were gonna botch it that badly. I don't know why they even decided to name this game Arkham Knight when the Arkham Knight character really isn't even all that important in the grand scheme of things. Because basically they just kind of force the Arkham Knight onto you. I mean, Jason Todd wasn't even mentioned in the previous games aside from one or two fucking throwaway lines. And how am I even supposed to care about him being captured by the Joker or whatever just through one like 3-minute flashback scene? I mean, sorry that I'm veering back into criticizing the Arkham Knight character, but still, it's all interconnected and linked. I mean, it's just so stupid. I mean, how am I, as the player or the audience, supposed to actually give a shit about this Jason Todd character and everything like that when we're only introduced to what his backstory is an hour or two, or 3 hours or a handful of hours before you really even get to know what his problem is before you unveil his true identity. I mean, it would have been more effective. I mean, I would forgive them for lying about the Arkham Knight's identity if perhaps Jason Todd had already been in the previous game or two or whatever and been a more prominent character so that I would have cared about him. Kind of like the Winter Soldier. The Winter Soldier was good because he was in the previous film, right? Bucky Barnes, who was the Winter Soldier, was in the first Captain America film. So they had an established relationship between Captain America or Steve Rogers and him. So when the unveil is happening, you care a bit more because you're more invested because there's been more character development up to that point. But I'm sorry, in this case, one or two small little cutscenes or flashback cutscenes that last all of maybe 3 minutes is just simply not going to cut it in terms of developing an emotional attachment for this character. He should have been in the previous two games in order for this twist, in order for this character to be more, for you to care more about this character, in order for him to be more believable. So that's basically my entire rant about this game. I'm very, very disappointed overall with the story of this game, but mechanically, gameplay wise, it's all still excellent. I mean, even the Batmobile segments aren't terrible. They're just, when you're comparing it to something that's been fundamentally refined over 3 games, that's basically excellent. It just it's only what would ideally be a good mechanic. Like the sections themselves are good, but when you switch to them from the hand-to-hand stuff and the brilliant stealth encounters, they just feel lackluster and mediocre in comparison. But overall, this is still a great game to buy if you're a Batman fan. It's a decent. I mean, I haven't even delved into the side content, which I'm sure is excellent. So, but overall, my opinion is that it's the worst of the entire series. I thought all the previous games, City was my favorite, but they're all of comparative quality. But this one, I just enjoyed it considerably less than the previous titles. So, yeah, a disappointment for me, but whatever. Peace out, guys.